Live from the Talking Joe studios.
It's Talking Joe.
Talking Joe is on the air.
Hey, it's me, Mark, aka The Funky Bunch, acting captain of USS Talking Joe. Welcome to Talking Joe Disavowed, Part 1. It's the first episode of our shows looking at the Devil's Due Run. Ooh, exciting. And joining me again on the poop deck, I said poop, it's the real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hi, Mark. Hi, everyone.
Hey, nice to have you back. You weren't scared off by your first episode.
Now I'm co-host. Hello to the tens of thousands of new listeners who have come to the show simply because I told Facebook that I was now co-host of this show.
Oh, you told Facebook, darn it. There's so many people on that. It's going to be a game changer, Tim. And rounding out our crew for our Disavowed coverage and ready to swab the deck. Whoa, Nelly. Who's the co-presenter on the show today? We'll find out in just a minute. It's a beautiful day to have a guest. Time to talk to one of the best. Is he broken? Can he be broken? We've had Ben, Chris, and S-Jub too. A few episodes in, away they flew. Broken. Oh, so broken. We've always wanted to have a guest just like you, like the Queen will ask, and what do you do? So let's make the most of this communique. Sorry to say, it is for no pay. Hope he's good, but not too good. This like, come on, Serpentor. Come on, guys, eat mince pies. Let's meet the co-presenter. It's G.I.J. It's Jay Cordray.
Hi, Joe fans. Like Mark said, my name's Jay Cordray. I'm a lifelong G.I. Joe fan, writer and artist myself, and I'm going to keep it real short. I'm also the administrator of a Facebook page dedicated to my favorite artist, which is called Fans of Al Williamson. And yeah, like I said, a lifelong fan, so I'm excited and ready to get into this.
Cool. And where are you from, Jay?
I live in McConnellsville, Ohio, which is about 80 miles southeast of Columbus, United States.
Good stuff. And how long have you been into Joe? What was the? Do you have a moment that you remember where you first encountered Joe and realized it was a lifelong love?
Well, I first encountered it. Yeah, I'm not sure about the lifelong part. My very first figure was Breaker, and I remember being with my mom in Zanesville, and she bought Breaker and the Ram motorcycle for me at the same time. And that kind of did it. And a little personal thing, the card art on Breaker at the time looked like my Uncle Raymond, the face painting. So, that made it kind of personal for me. But yeah, I had all those original figures. I think all of my original 13 are the straight arm. And basically I had everything up through 1987.
Cool. So you were right in at the beginning,
Yeah.
82er.
Yep.
Excellent. And when did you first encounter the comics?
My first comic was actually issue 18, which came out in December of 1983. Yeah, so it was a little after I had got got my first figures. Mm-hmm. And actually that kind of plays into something else that we'll talk about later, so I don't want to get into it too much right now.
Okay, but yeah, you've been there from the beginning, so that's all good stuff. And cool. And I noticed, Tim, that you'd updated your website over at A Real American Book with another very interesting update and a piece of art that I've not seen before. This time it was Rampart. So can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so again, not the package painting that we all saw at toy stores. This is the Hasbro internal presentation painting. So only people at Hasbro saw this, and this was used for every character to pitch the character to the higher-ups. This was painted by James A. Payette, who I had a lot of difficulty finding anything about. So where he's going to show up in my book, it's probably going to be a half a sentence, which actually works out because he did these presentation paintings for G.I. Joe for about 3 years. But this was while other artists like Dave Dorman and Bart Sears were doing these paintings. So his contribution to G.I. Joe is small and finite, but he's not a household name amongst Joe fans who know who worked at Hasbro, because his stuff has barely surfaced, right? If you Google like G.I. Joe James A. Payette, you get like 3 images, one that's sold at auction, and that 1 or 2 that have been reproduced in some books. So I'm trying to find out more about him, but I don't know that I will.
I didn't know that Bart Sears ever worked on the property.
Yeah, Sears was a figure designer. He designed 2 figures. He designed some accessories for other figures. He did some of these presentation paintings, but he was quickly put on cops, which if you talk to Hasbro employees, they'll often call cops and crooks. But Sears designed the cops line all 3 years, including that 3rd year that didn't get made.
Yeah, I can see that now that you mention it. It definitely looks a lot like his artwork.
Yeah, you think of Big Boss's eyebrows, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a Bart Sears drawing as interpreted by a sculptor.
I have a feeling, was it Bart Sears did Rock and Roll version 2? Am I remembering right?
He contributed to it. I can't definitively say he was the designer.
Okay. Contributed then.
That was a nice figure. I really liked that Rock and Roll.
It was definitely one of those ones where it was a different take versus the version 1, but one that was very much a success in its own right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not too sure how many of those I would be able to pluck out of my head where they've deviated to quite a significant extent from the look of the original, but have made an iconic figure that is that stands just as well as, or maybe even better than the version 1 figure. Yeah,
you can say that again.
There should be a term for that, because I feel like that's what I wanted for all of the figures. 3 years later, 5 years later, in the toys, in the comics, and the new animation, if you're going to redesign a character, there's sort of not redesigning it enough, and there's redesigning it too much, or there's giving this character something completely different to do and redesigning them too much, and then I don't really feel it's the same character anymore. And Rock and Roll, you're right, Mark. That's that sweet spot.
Yeah, and maybe Stalker as well. That I don't know if it's version 2, but the sort of the tundra with the white puffer jacket. That's another one where they've gone in a completely different direction, but it's still really worked as a look and as a toy design, but sort of still feeling like it's retained the original kind of vibe, let's say, of the version 1.
Stalker goes from Detroit to Southeast Asia to Alaska.
I think of
unlike Gung Ho, he's willing to stick on a coat. He's not proud man.
He came with a kayak, right?
Yeah.
Even if the design doesn't work, that accessory is so undeniably great that it's worth buying that toy.
Yeah, the kayak was really neat.
There we go. So that was Rampart. I always get him confused with Pathfinder for some reason. Go and check out the blog over at arealamericanbook.com to see that art and him in an action pose there doing what he is meant to do, which is defending the coast. Good stuff. I don't know about you two, but I'm ready to talk some comics from Devil's Due.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's get into it.
Yes.
We're gonna talk about comics from Devil's Due. It's something you wondered if Talking Joe would ever do. I guess we'll explain it all to you. Gonna take some time to read the books we've never read.
So, normally in these shows, we're going to be aiming to, at pace, cover an arc or so of the story. So, however much that takes, whether that's a couple of issues or 4 or so, and move along at clip. But because this is the first issue and there's a lot of context around that's worth discussing, we're just going to be covering issue 1 of the Devil's Due book from Image. And I thought I'd just lay out some of the context of where we were at the time when this came out in 2001 and where we'd travelled from. So over in the comics, we'd had Marvel, G.I. Joe, issue 155, concluding the series in December 1994. And then subsequently, not too much longer afterwards, Dark Horse launched a series called G.I. Joe Extreme, which ran from 1995 to September 1996, and was a tie-in to that same toy. That it was a tie-in to the toy that's coming out at the same time. There was a comic then from Bench Press that they tried to launch and revitalize and relaunch the G.I. Joe Real American Hero brand with Larry Hama at the helm. And that didn't get past a couple of sample pages being produced, so that fell apart in 1999. And there was an enthusiasm that was building for the G.I. Joe characters, and it was foreshadowed by an article in the very influential Wizard issue 111, which came out in December 2000. And Wizard, as you'll know, was the preeminent fan magazine of the day. You know, when they were commissioning articles, they would, alongside it, commission popular artists to produce renditions to make those articles more interesting. And they ran in this particular issue a special all about kind of nostalgic properties that might perhaps come back. And in the issue, they included pieces from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, as interpreted by Joe Madureira, who was a hot artist of the Uncanny X-Men. We had G.I. Joe, penciled by J. Scott Campbell, and Transformers by Pat Lee, who would go on to form Dreamwave and acquire the Transformers license a couple of years later. And in the G.I. Joe article, as I say, it was accompanied by this wonderful splash image from J. Scott Campbell. And they speculated on how it could be relaunched. They put forward Greg Rucka as the writer, which I think was a great choice. And actually, when we talked about who might be a good choice to relaunch G.I. Joe, Greg Rucka was the name that I suggested would be a very good fit. So that was kind of what's happening in the background with the comics. And over in the world of toys, the main line stopped in 1994. Then we had Sergeant Savage joining shortly after 1994-95, and then Extreme in 96-7 or 95 up to 7. And there were some modest store exclusives for the Real American Hero line, but was mostly based on the reuse of existing molds. And we didn't see a proper relaunch until 2002, when Hasbro decided to go all in on a new line of Joes called G.I. Joe versus Cobra, with new sculpts from head to toe, and very much with lots of synergies into the comics of the time from G.I. Joe. So there was quite a big gap, really, both in terms of toys and comics for that proper nostalgic G.I. Joe brand, a gap of 5-6 years, really. So when Devil's Due launched, it was tapping into this wave of nostalgia that probably most people didn't quite recognize or realize might be there. And they had a preview in 2001, followed shortly by the issue 1 in September 2001. And the first issue of the revamped G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, from Devil's Due, published through Image, went on sale September 12th, 2001. So in terms of timing, we're talking here about the day after 9/11. So quite a strange time to be having an issue 1 of particularly this book landing. And assembling this issue, the creators had no way of knowing that their comic about America's daring, highly trained Special Mission Force would debut a day after the deadliest terrorist attack in American history. But orders of the revamped G.I. Joe were very good, and enough that Devil's Due, who had initially announced a 4-issue miniseries, were able to pretty much immediately after announce that this would actually be an ongoing, and start even thinking about potential spin-offs. Whew. A lot going on in terms of the brand, and you can kind of see why people were hungry for it.
There's a little bit more context worth mentioning that
Go for it.
Josh Blaylock, who wrote this new comic and was also the president of Devil's Due Publishing, the company that had the G.I. Joe license, Blaylock had previously made G.I. Joe T-shirts.
Yes.
He had licensed from Hasbro G.I. Joe, and I think Transformers and maybe some other brands. I don't remember. But he had sold official G.I. Joe T-shirts that got into stores. And there were one or two other things, and I don't remember what they were, but I want to say buttons or pins or like those things that make your car smell good that you hang from the rearview mirror. But that kind of thing. But it was basically, let's just say, T-shirts. And if you feel like it's a leap to go from T-shirts to comic books, Blaylock had been making comics, and what this really speaks to is a business relationship with Hasbro. That Hasbro wanted to make a deal with someone who understood licensing, right? Like, I'm going to protect your brand while I present it in a way that's different than how you present your brand, right? Hasbro makes toys. Hasbro knows toys. Hasbro doesn't make T-shirts. Hasbro doesn't make books. They don't make sleeping bags. So, they license out these characters and brands to companies that do. So there was already a relationship. And so Blaylock could bring some confidence to this arrangement. It's like, well, we've worked well together so far. Why don't I also acquire the license to G.I. Joe comic books?
Yeah, and it was that kind of background in the licensing for the likes of T-shirts that made him realize that he was onto a good thing, because there was an enormous appetite for these brands, for the license or Transformers T-shirts and the G.I. Joe T-shirts and those kind of things that he had already been putting out there into the market. And one of the reasons that he picked G.I. Joe, by the sounds of things, was that Transformers was the bigger brand. It was the more active brand, and he realized that going for G.I. Joe would be the easier sell in terms of acquiring the license as a relatively young unknown. It's less of a bet and less of a whereas the Hasbro brand, the Transformers brand was more active and probably would have been more protected also.
I think it goes to show how much of a desire there is for these characters. Like you said, they're they had the Wizard article, and I think Tim said the other day that your average consumer might not know about Snake Eyes' story, but they see Snake Eyes and they know him, in the same kind of way that a lot of people are familiar with Wolverine. They say, oh, well, that's Wolverine, that's Snake Eyes. And I think that was always kind of there, so bringing it back in 2001, it doesn't seem to me like a huge gamble for them. I think that it was just, the ARAH book had gone, and not just the book, but the line of toys had gone so far away from the original concept that people kind of lost interest in it. So bringing it back and kind of paring it down to its beginnings was probably a welcome return for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's sort of the approach was that the people who were going to buy this book weren't necessarily the same target audience in the way that they would have marketed it back in 1982 or whenever it was that the issue 1 launched. I think the thought process there was, we're digging into a nostalgic vibe here. When there isn't an active toy that's being promoted heavily to 5-year-olds. There isn't a TV show, there. The people who are going to, and the comic market is a very different place as well in 2001 versus the early 80s. The people that are going to buy this comic are they going to be the people who read it as kids themselves. So they're going to be in their mid-20s for the most part. The people who were buying the figures and the toys in the mid 80s, and now it's almost 20 years on, and they're wanting to recapture some of the joy that they had from that experience when they were younger.
Yeah, it's definitely a nostalgic property written towards an now older audience. That's how, when you have lines like Shipwreck talking about going to, I think it was Flint's aunt's wedding and throwing up margaritas or something on her, we wouldn't have had that in the first several issues of the original run. But now that we were at that time 30, we can laugh at those things because we've hopefully not thrown up on anybody's aunts, but we've had those kind of experiences by that point.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a very interesting Interesting observation. You're right. That's definitely not the sort of thing that would have been referenced in the original run, and is more of a wink to the kind of experiences of a more mature audience. Okay, so let's get into the issue itself. So we're looking at issue 1 of The Devil's Due, reinstated arc from September 2001. The creative team was story and layouts, Josh Blaylock, pencils, Steve Kurth, inks, John Larter, and colours from Hi-Fi Design. So Hi-Fi Colour Design was Colour Studio, co-founded by Brian Miller and his wife, Kirsty, as a studio focusing very much on the emerging digital colours of the time. Edits were Scott Whirl, and cover A artist was J. Scott Campbell, with back cover by David Michael Beck. Let's jump in and discuss the covers.
Favorite cover?
I like the Campbell cover a lot. I mean, if you're a fan of Campbell, it's definitely something that's going to appeal to you. You know, his characters are pretty cartoony. If you have the book, it's kind of a retrospective of his artwork. Even includes a lot of stuff that he did in high school. So you see his development where he kind of Mort Drucker, you know, Mad Magazine, that really influenced his style with a lot of caricature kind of stuff. But the cover, I think, is great. My only one little tiny nitpick would be I don't like Roadblock having an earring. I do like that he doesn't put Shipwreck in his traditional sailor's outfit, and he just kind of has the sweater. And we see that look carried out through the rest of the book too.
Yeah, for sure. The Roadblock one is an interesting one. I definitely wasn't a fan of that at the time, but I wondered whether it was potentially a bit of a reference to the version 4 Roadblock, where they did introduce an earring. I think it was on a different ear, but it's not the first time that he's had some ear decoration, let's say. But this J. Scott Campbell, it's after Michael Golden, and that reference being to his Yearbook 2 cover. So the composition is pretty similar. We've got Snake Eyes down at the front. I think the biggest carryover probably is actually the background, where there's that big American flag in the background, which is very much a complete carryover from that design. But yeah, if you're going to reference a cover, it's a good one to pick.
I think that I like J. Scott Campbell's G.I. Joe work, and he bridges the world of animation and the world of comics because there is so much cartooniness in his artwork. His poses are kinetic. He has he has total accuracy in the technical stuff, right? Like these weapons all look real and convincing. This cover, the characters are very close together, and I know that comic book covers are an exaggeration of what's happening inside, or sometimes it's just a shot of Spider-Man or Batman on a rooftop, and it's just like a glamour shot or a portrait. And that, there's no moment in the story where these 7 Joes are standing, and 6 Joes are standing on and in front of a flag. That said, they're so close together. I've always been a little distracted that this feels like a photographer has these 6 people stand and then says like, no, Flint, like put your shoulder against Roadblock's shoulder, right? No. Scarlet, move your elbow closer to Snake Eyes' head. And like the sentence, like they wouldn't stand that way normally, like that doesn't make sense and it's not helpful. But it's for a cover where sort of no action is happening, it's just like a glamour shot. It's really busy. I also think that the first issue of a new series doesn't need to reference an existing cover. I think that that's fun and it's recognizable, and like a cover swipe or a cover homage is not the same thing as like remaking a movie or remaking a song. But like, hey, J. Scott Campbell, Josh Blaylock, this is your chance to create an iconic image that would forever represent this new version of G.I. Joe. Like, must it like so carefully reference an existing image from G.I. Joe? That said, I think the drawing's great. One last thing.
I mean, I think it's different enough that it's not a standard homage. They're all in different positions. The characters used are 50% different, let's say.
Well, and your camera's a lot closer to the characters too on the camera.
Yeah. So while there's a lot of the DNA of Golden there and inspiration, it's a very different image, and I think it was able to quickly create its own iconic image, and it's sort of, you know, almost like the mission statement of the book in terms of, you know, that nostalgic background there and being informed by what's coming before, but you know, having a modern twist to it and still, you know, being its own thing.
That's a good point. So Snake Eyes and Shipwreck, all of Snake Eyes and Shipwreck's hat and sweater, the line work is inverted, right? So if you draw a character who's going to be completely in black, if you have a black outline, you lose the black outline because the black fill touches it. So oftentimes a character like Snake Eyes is actually colored in dark gray, dark purple, dark blue. So one solution with digital coloring and digital tools is you highlight that black outline and then you actually color it in some other color like gray. Yeah. And I think that works for some things. When J. Scott Campbell like draws Spider-Man and the webbing is not gray fill with a black outline, but sort of white outline, and you get the sense that it's shiny and silky and translucent. Sometimes Broken Glass is colored this way in comics. I think that works. And I think this does work, and there's really no problem with it. But what I see in this approach is an inconsistent treatment of line and color. And as an art guy, I find it a little distracting.
I think it works better on Shipwreck's sweater than it does on Snake Eyes, but that's just me.
I mean, it's not. I wouldn't have picked up on that per se, and it's an interesting observation. I think it's probably really, as you say, only an effect that is achievable because they've got digital colors happening. If it hadn't been for that, where they could do these line holds, that they would probably be having to go a slightly different route in terms of trying to create that effect and the pop on Snake Eyes' blacks of his costumes. Going by the original line art to that image, it looks like probably J. Scott Campbell just didn't use any blacks himself in terms of the solids. That would have been left to the inker to achieve, not the inker, the colorist to achieve all of that. Just purely basing it on his penciled version of that same cover. But
I see. I don't think I've ever seen the pencil or the original artwork for it.
It's included in the convention special, which has got some sort of behind the scenes sort of designs, and it includes the first few pages of the issue in black and white, and also the pencils to this cover. I
have one last nitpick, and this is a rule for all G.I. Joe logo types. Right, the angle of the italicization, the italics of G.I. Joe, the words under it, A Real American Hero, need to have the same amount of italics.
So you like the lines to be parallel. So the L of the real is parallel to the I of the Joe, for example.
Yes, and
I of G.I. Joe above it.
And there are some small irregularities in the black outline of the word G.I. Joe, where at the tail end of the E, it's a little thick and thin. And I like this cover. It needs another pass on graphic design.
Okay, that might possibly have been drawn by hand. I've seen some artists do the actual logos like that, right onto the cover. So, I mean, that could explain why the black on the E is a little thicker at the top than at the bottom.
I think by 2001, particularly that all the lettering in the book is computer. I think certainly this logo is Photoshop or Illustrator. It was made in Adobe, and it was certainly traced from an earlier G.I. Joe logo.
Okay, let's move on to the back cover, because I think it's worth calling these out. We've got David Michael Beck with a painted rendition of Snake Eyes, which was, I think, used as the second printing for this issue. And almost, I'd say, an instantly iconic image, which seems to have inspired, I think, some of the images used of Snake Eyes in the movie, which came out a few years later. And David Michael Beck, I don't think he was a particularly familiar name but sounds like he was a budding, a jobbing local artist to Josh Blaylock, based in Cincinnati. And he was really wowed by his stuff and his style, and as part of that, asked that he provide these back covers for the first few issues.
I hadn't heard of him, and his website bio says that he started his career in 1972, and I think he was new to comics, because so I hadn't heard of him and I hadn't seen his work before. But at the end of this G.I. Joe comic book, the final page is an ad for another book that Image is publishing, and it has a cover by David Michael Beck. And this ad says, featuring 2 covers, sci-fi legend David Beck. So some people out there knew him.
Enough people to call him a legend. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's not bad. I like it.
Yeah, he was described by Josh Blaylock as being an older artist. I think he said he was in his 50s while he was sort of starting out as a young whippersnapper, and was sort of like very kind of fatherly and sort of offering advice and all of these things to these guys who are starting out. So yeah, as you say, sort of a bit of a generational difference there.
It's always exciting in comics when an editor or an art director, springs for paint, because painters get paid more, or at least they traditionally have, and they should, because it takes longer. And a painted cover or back cover adds a certain heft that a line drawing does not. You think of like He-Man storybooks from the 80s, or Conan paperbacks from decades past. So I love the idea that just a G.I. Joe comic book can have a fully painted cover or back cover. This image has never quite grabbed me, and I think Beck's technique, his textures are really pretty. I think here and there I'm a little confused by sort of a change in color or a contour. Like, I'm not quite sure if I'm looking at a muscle or not quite a clothing fold, because Snake Eyes is wearing a tight suit. I think some of the sort of icing on the cake of this, right, like the chrome of his visor and his sword, the coolness of the pose, right? He's quiet, he's deadly, he's got his sword. I think some of those things get more attention than some of the anatomical foundation underneath.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with that tricep, but I think that it looks pretty good. I mean, I think it's somebody that's probably not necessarily real familiar with the property. A bigger Joe fan might have done some things differently, like no idea what that is on Snake Eyes' wrist, or his forearm for that matter. But the sword handle that he's holding looks really nice. The one that's on his back looks really nice. So he's definitely somebody that is very talented.
Yeah, I think that thing that looks like a watch is his brand new communicator, and you'll see it on the front cover as well. It's part of the redesign.
I also want to give credit to Josh Blaylock for hiring David Michael Beck to do back covers for this whole arc. And he then became a sort of back cover artist or cover artist for other Devil's Due G.I. Joe comics. We all like the consistency of a recurring artist in comics, whether it's the cover artist or the interior artist. And though there are things that I might do differently if I could paint, and I can't. So I just, it's easy to criticize, right?
Right.
Like, this image isn't as the way that I want it to be, right? It's like, I can't do this. I can't do the texture, the wall behind him. I can't do the chrome of the sword. But
I'm right there with you.
That Beck kept coming back, and that Blaylock had him, and that rather than putting an ad on the back cover for some other Devil's Due project or some other Image comic, right? Like, you're making less money if you just hire an artist and put a new piece of art on the back cover rather than run an ad there. And I've always appreciated that decision, because a comic book should be special, but the back cover is the most valuable advertising real estate.
Yeah, very good point. It sort of speaks to, I guess, the love that they had of the brand, and I guess the willingness to invest the time, money, and energy into making it look a little bit more special than it would have otherwise be. So now we've done the covers, let's jump on in the inside and start with a plot breakdown. In the Florida Everglades, Kamakura spies on the Dreadnought compound and Snake Eyes uploads the intel that has been gathered. Double O Duke gathers a team of Joes and shows surveillance photos showing Cobra Commander back in action on domestic soil. And that as a result, the G.I. Joe team is reinstated and the call is made out to the former Joes. While Roadblock, Flint and Shipwreck catch up on old times, Scarlet and Snake Eyes have a tense moment where Scarlet slaps Snake Eyes. It's revealed that Snake Eyes left Scarlet 3 weeks before they were due to be married. Back at the Dreadnought compound, Cobra Commander unveils the nanomachines to the Cobra High Command. Later, Cobra Commander retires to his quarters where some females wait for him. A woman. But Destro's General Lillian is one of them, and she attacks Cobra Commander. We end on a cliffhanger as Destro enters and has the Crimson Guardsmen take Cobra Commander captive. Dun dun dun!
I was a little surprised to see Cobra Commander go into a room with 2 women in it like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was an observation that I had as well. It seems out of character. We've not, as far as I can remember, not really had a comparable scene in the original Larry Hama run of, Cobra really seeming to be bothered by the opposite sex, to be honest.
Yeah.
Or anyone. G.I. Joe is... No, I mean, not...
It's
not,
true.
I mean, there's a little bit of... There's romance between Snake Eyes and Scarlet, and there's some romance between Destro, Baroness, and Flint and Lady J. But most of it is off-panel. And G.I. Joe is sort of the overall story and brand. It's pretty platonic. Mm-hmm. So any scene where anyone walks into a room and there's sort of this moment
Hooker.
This moment of seduction, someone with the sex of their desire, right? We've just never seen that. So the scene feels very new to G.I. Joe.
Yeah. Let's get on to art. So we've got Josh Blaylock on layouts and Steve Curse on pencils with inks by John Latta. What I don't think I appreciated at the time that Josh Blaylock was actually doing the layouts as well as writing the thing as well. So yeah, a little bit of an auteur there. I mean, his style is naturally quite simplistic and cartoony. So I think he probably appreciated that he wouldn't necessarily have the chops on his own to quite carry off G.I. Joe if he was going to do full pencils himself. But also realistically being able to have the time to do that on top of everything else. Yeah, what did we think of the look of the thing?
I've never seen any of Blaylock's pencils. I think the layouts, for the most part, are pretty good. And Kurth does a lot of stuff that's really good, like when he's drawing buildings, and sometimes the machinery looks really good. And one of the issues that we're going to hit later, I think it's with the first page, you see 3 or 4 cityscapes that look really good. But the faces in this were a huge problem for me to get through, especially the women's faces. Just seemed to be a lot of time very skewed, and it was really jarring.
Yeah, so interesting you pick on particularly the women's face, because he's got these high sort of cheekbones, are very sort of defined. He's got sort of the lines coming around to sort of draw it down through to the chin. And if you look at particularly Baroness, who's a bit of a sort of typically portrayed as a bit of a bombshell look, cover, quite often like to be featured as a variant cover because of the sex appeal. She's drawn in quite a strange sort of almost insectoid way with a very with strange kind of bulgy glasses and a very pointy kind of chin.
Yeah, that first image of her on the monitor is, I don't even have the word for it. Tim, what do you think?
I had problems. I can't read this book without flashing back to September 2001 when I first read this book. And I was so excited because a lot of great decisions had been made. Like, let's bring back a G.I. Joe comic. We'll start with a miniseries. J. Scott Campbell does the cover. We are continuing the story from before.
Actually, what I hadn't mentioned before as well is that Devil's Due had very successfully, been working on the social medias back when this, that was a still pretty new kind of thing, that they had a very professional website, very active message boards, and really building up quite a large sense of anticipation for this book, and really, all of those people sort of rediscovering the brand, talking about their favorite toys from before, and favorite memories from the Marvel books, and speculating about what might be to come. It helped sort of fuel that. I don't know if you were particularly active on any of that at the time of the review, but I was fairly active on the Devil's Due boards in the run up and sort of first few issues coming out, and it did really sort of create that sort of sense of anticipation.
I'll just say the word cheekbones. Steve Kurth's art was disappointing to me at the time, and I had a strong reaction to it, and I will continue this thread in another episode of this podcast. But after reading this issue, I wrote a letter and sent it in to the publisher and the editor to be continued. I want to hold off until issue 3. I want to lure listeners back to a future episode. But what I will say is that Steve Kurth is doing a little cartooning here and there. Like when he draws Destro's head, he's exaggerating. He's got wide lips and a wide chin, and his eyes are set far apart, and his cheekbones are really far apart. But it doesn't look realistic. His cheekbones look like it's like an exaggerated sculpture of a skull, not a person, not a head, not a mask. And the good news is that as much as I disliked the art at the time, Steve Kurth, many years later, came back to draw G.I. Joe comics and did really spectacular work. And in between, he drew an Ultimate Iron Man miniseries from Marvel, where he was very much channeling Brian Hitch. And there's a pinup, and I can't remember quite where it is, but it's in the first year or two of Devil's Due on G.I. Joe. But Kurth drew a double splash G.I. Joe Transformers crossover pinup. And there he's very much channeling sort of an earlier Brian Hitch, when Hitch's stuff looked more like Alan Davis and less like sort of the modern Brian Hitch, who's more photorealistic, who drew the Ultimates. But Kurth's anatomy isn't quite there, and I wished that at the time that Blaylock had either hired a different artist or worked more with Kurth to do some revisions. The storytelling is clear, and I can follow the story. Although the panel where Kamakura hands the data disk to Snake Eyes is sort of oddly composed, because unless you see a tiny fingertip and a tiny little triangle in the top left corner of the panel, you actually don't see Kamakura handing this data disk to Snake Eyes. You just see Snake Eyes sitting there holding his arm up for no reason. And then the next two panels, the thing that Snake Eyes is doing, walking away with the data disk is like a 0.5 millimeter large in these very small panels. So I like
some good heavy lifting done by the colorist to actually isolate that and make it pop, so that you can see it if you're looking hard enough.
It would have been very easy to miss that.
One last thing about Kurth and Larder in terms of anatomy, not just sort of chins and faces, but there are a lot of extra lines on like temples and cheekbones and cheeks that don't quite correspond to anatomy or wrinkles or shadows, and it is a sign of artists who are still learning, that they'll put in a lot of stuff because it either looks cool or it sort of distracts from a lack of foundation. And I think of someone like sort of the opposite of this, like Mike Parabek, who drew 3 years of Batman Adventures, the comic based on the cartoon. his art is so unadorned. He never hides behind sort of style and flash. And I think of someone like Jay Lee when he broke into comics drawing Namor for Marvel and then Youngblood Strike File for Rob Liefeld. His pages had like all this really exciting, visceral, like ink lines and splatters and textures. But what he was really doing is sort of showing that he like didn't have confidence in drawing locations and anatomy. And I see a little of that here sort of in every line on like an eyebrow or a forehead or a cheek. The art here it's pretty good. It needs a lot of work.
Agreed.
Yep, I got that. But it's sort of thinking about the layout as well, which would have been from Blaylock. They are packing in a lot of story. There is a lot of panels on almost every page. There's the one where they make out the call to the various Joes to get them back into the team. Concluding on the call to Bazooka, and I think there's 13 panels on that page, and on all but a few splashier images. There, you're looking at at least 5, 6, 7 panels per page. So they're sort of fitting in a lot of storytelling into the book, and sort of pushing it along. It feels like they're sort of covering a fair amount in a single issue.
It is a lot, and that page in particular that you're talking about, where they make all the phone calls. I mean, like Tim said, some of the faces, aren't that great. I think, like I said, Blaylock does really nice layouts. I think he's got that set up really well. It works, and I give him credit for being able to get that much stuff on one page.
Yeah, and it looks like Puck from Alpha Fight is joining the G.I. Joe type team as well from that page, so that's quite exciting. Oh, hold on, that's Gung Ho, right? Yeah.
My favorite was when we get to Bazooka and he's all heavy, and then later they say that he couldn't pass the physical.
Yeah, a lot changes over 5 years, but actually for Bazooka, this sort of touches on another point for this comic, that it's almost as equally inspired by the cartoon as by the comics, because in the comics, Bazooka featured in a one issue, one and done, where they're fighting the bats with it's the issue where the bats first reveal. Is this a cover that you've actually got, Tim? Do you own that cover for that issue?
44 with Lady J.
Yeah,
it's on my wall.
beautiful cover. And
Is Bazooka in that one?
that's got Bazooka, Airtight, and Crankcase. Anybody else?
I'm sorry. I'm thinking of the Mike
Lady
Zeck
J.
cover. Yeah, Lady J is on the Silver Mirage, and she's looking over her
Yeah.
shoulder, and there's an 18-wheeler.
Lady J's training the new Joes in the issue. Yeah, apart from that, and even that issue doesn't feature Bazooka with enormous degree of deep dive into his character or anything. He just appears in a couple of places, like in the Invasion of Springfield and whatnot. He's not really developed. So,
but he was never a major character.
Yeah, but whereas in the cartoon, he's in there quite a lot, and he's got a bit of a sort of a comedy double act with him and Quick Kick, right? Tim, you'll be able to talk. Is it Alpine?
Yeah.
Alpine and not
No, Alpine and Bazooka, right, Tim?
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, Mark, I think what you're picking up on here is that this page where we check in with 9 or 10 Joes coming out of retirement is that the punchline is on Bazooka.
Yeah.
Because not only is he out of shape, but he's
bald.
He's bald, and also he's not slow-witted or dumb. But I feel like there's sort of this implied, Stalker's playing basketball, and Dusty's been redeployed to a desert, and Jinx is in the middle of Tokyo, and this tiny panel, there's all this information, there are all these neon lights behind her, and Bazooka is just sitting. He's sedentary, right? And he runs security, right? So one way of playing this is like, he has his own company. He's a success after leaving G.I. Joe. And the other is, he's bald, he's obese, and
he's became Paul Blart Mall Cop.
Yeah.
This actually gets into a point, sort of an overall point. I know we're still talking about the art, but at the time, I thought it was really cool to move ahead 7 years and to refer to the fact that the Joes did other things and now they had to come back. And maybe they had to give up things, right? Like Stalker has to leave his family and go back to work, right? And the implication is that he didn't have a family in the previous comics. And this reminds me a little bit of the two-parter There's no place like Springfield, where we jump ahead a few years and G.I. Joe has been disbanded and the Joes have moved on. Similarly, on the Cobra side, Zartan, right there in the first few pages, there's dialogue that refers to, everyone's older, the Dreadnoks have expanded, and Zartan's eyesight isn't as good as it used to be, and quote, like due to his skin condition, which is like a sideways reference to his toy, which turned blue in sunlight. And what I realize now in rereading this comic with a different perspective is that I now disagree with the decision to move ahead 7 years. And my analogy is The Simpsons, right? Where the show's been on for years and every week they have some adventures, then they learn something. And some things do change, right? Like in early episodes, they didn't have computers or smartphones, and now they do. But, Bart's still in whatever it is, 4th grade. And I'm actually not interested in The Simpsons aging in real time, or even a little bit. I don't want there to be like a season where they jump ahead 10 years and Bart is in high school, because that's not the Bart that I know. And the Marvel G.I. Joe comic that ran for 155 issues, and its continuation now, which has run for another 100 plus, time progresses, right? Like, they don't refer to Vietnam anymore as a war. They refer to sort of the Southeast Asian conflict, because it's not just 5 or 10 years out. And some characters have aged a little bit, right? Like Throwdown, but it's basically still the Joes. And you have this sort of mixture of time where, what time is it? It's now. Have the Joes been fighting Cobra for a long time? Yes. Are they getting older? No. And that's actually what I want, because this stuff with Zartan getting older and Bazooka getting obese, it makes me sad. And I don't want to read about these characters like getting older, right? Like, oh, going up these stairs at Joe headquarters is sure different now that I'm 38, not, 28. Like that makes for
the hikes of 38.
That makes for a punchline, but it adds something to G.I. Joe that I don't think should be there.
Not only are they getting older, but several of them have children. Zanya is in here, and my first question was, who's her mom? And like you said, you see Stalker playing basketball with his kids. There's another child that's in here of a major character that I won't spoil anything in case anybody's reading along and hasn't gotten past issue 1 yet. And you think, well, where did this guy come from? Maggie Simpson has been a baby for 30 years. So I see what you're saying.
And I think they do dial back on that idea of that aging, that it is clearly quite a big feature of this issue 1, but as the series progresses, they kind of forget about that whole issue a little bit, and in a couple of characters it seems a little bit more pronounced that they're older and different, like Hawk/Tomahawk is clearly older, a little bit more grizzled. He's had maybe a bit more promotion in his career, and he's now part of the Jugglers. Duke has moved on past the Joes, and now he's some sort of top secret super spy for some hush hush agency, and they're very different in a very different place versus where they we saw them last in the Marvel run. And then I think over time, and we'll see this as we'll read the issues, that I think they do dial back on that they gradually get a little bit closer to the what we would see as the real mold of the character, that we would kind of the silhouette of what you would expect to see that character be all of their sort of defining features.
I think for me the portrayal of Hawk was probably the biggest disappointment. He just was not the same as Hawk that you'd seen through almost the entire run of the original series. He was more, if you could have called him General Flag, and if we didn't know that General Flag died in like issue 16, you would think, oh, okay, well, I can see that. Flag was this old grizzled veteran that was kind of curmudgeonly, and also that one of the little details that I didn't like was calling him Tomahawk. He has a code name already. It's Hawk. There's no reason to add the Tomahawk to it. Just it didn't sit well with me, that the whole portrayal of that character.
I think Tim probably will know this better than I, but I think there were some issues with the copyright of these characters where Hasbro had let them lapse, and other companies had bought up the copyright, which was why, when the figures were coming out in 2002 and so on, that often they might be called different names than the ones we knew. I've a feeling that there might have been a Hawk figure that came out called Tomahawk, and we saw Bazooka being launched as Sergeant Bazooka, that kind of thing.
Yeah, there is a 2000 General Tomahawk figure, which is clearly Hawk.
Yeah, so it was probably an edict from Hasbro that to play it safe, let's not use the Hawk name, just in case it gets them on sticky ground.
That makes sense.
What next? Let's talk about maybe some of the, I guess, incorporation of comics and cartoons, because this was sort of, I think part of the mission statement again was like, let's have it as the comic and sort of play into that history of the comic, but let's also sort of take some inspiration from the cartoons as well. I wondered if you guys picked up on that.
Yeah, Tomax and Zaymot finish each other's
Sandwiches.
sentences as they do in the cartoon, and they refer to, or Cobra Commander refers to, Extensive Enterprises, which is their company from the TV show that was never mentioned or a part of the Marvel comic. And I'm okay with that. I loved their portrayal in the TV show. I loved Extensive Enterprises, and that the sort of business relationship that Cobra ostensibly has with Mars, Destro's military armament company, which is only ever referred to, I think, one time in the entire cartoon, right? And Destro is just sort of recast as like a second in command, which he wouldn't be. So bringing Extensive Enterprises into the comic felt fun. Yeah, it felt fun.
Sorry, in the cartoon, I'm not so familiar with the cartoon, and I've not watched a lot of it for quite a while. Do they have an equivalent of green shirts in there as well? So this is a big introduction point for the comics, is that there are these people from the military and various other services that are being brought in as a kind of proving ground for G.I. Joe. So they've almost got their own infantry, which they call their green shirts. Was that something that we saw a bit of in the cartoon?
Yes and no. In the same way that, like, if you film a movie and you have people eating at a restaurant and you hire extras to be in the background, or you have a parade and you hire extras to be in the background, the green shirts on the cartoon were just extras. They never spoke. They were never referred to. They didn't have names. They were just, like, anytime the Joes are attacking Cobra, if you need 10 or 30 more people to drive some other vehicles or to be in a vehicle with one of the marquee characters who talks, there's a green shirt. But they are sort of, though they're clearly visible, they're oddly invisible.
Yeah, I get that. And how do you feel about I don't even need to ask you, Tim. How do you feel about the introduction of these green shirts to fill out the G.I. Joe forces?
I don't think it's necessary, because the actual G.I. Joe team, like all the toys that Hasbro made, individual people with costumes and names, there are so many of them, just use them. Like, it does make sense that you'd have mechanics and cooks and security guards, but I don't want to spend precious pages and panels on that when, like someone like Downtown or Rampart or Bullhorn. It's like, bring them in, Jay.
Absolutely agree. There's so many characters that you could use. There's no reason, except, like you said, people to refuel the planes, load ammunition, things like that, which would be support troops you would only see on the base. When you're out on a mission, there's no reason to have green shirts.
Yeah, I think I agree with both of those points. Probably part of where they're coming from is that, the Joes are so old now that 7 years has passed. They're probably, in their late 20s, mid 30s. God, some of these guys way past it, as we all know. And so you need to bring in the fresh blood, and that part of that is the proving ground of the green shirts to have a pool that you can select some of the new best of best for the next generation Joes. But yeah, you could do that without creating a whole infantry of green shirts.
But then, besides references to the cartoon, there's a reference to the toy and the comic on the same page where a bunch of these green shirts are introduced and they're all lined up as Hawk gives them a speech. He says, he sees Kamakura and he says, "How'd the Green Power Ranger get in here? I thought I made it clear that I won't repeat the, quote, ninja force recruitments the upper brass passed in the 90s. And that's a like cute and funny swipe at the Ninja Force line of toys that came out for 2 years at the end of the 80s, 90s run, but also that the comic book near the end of the Marvel run got, as some people called it, quote, ninja crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And I always hesitate when a brand makes fun of itself. And this scene just flashes me back to the first X-Men movie where they're in the Blackbird and they're flying to the showdown and Wolverine and Cyclops are talking and the conversation's like, "Oh, this black leather, it's sort of tight and uncomfortable. Like, what do you expect? Yellow spandex?" And the audience like giggles because we know that in the comics and in like the, you know, at the grand opening of a Toys R Us where you have a person in a costume, it's like yellow spandex and that's dumb. But no, it's not dumb. That's what it is. don't make fun of it.
And probably even more so the first G.I. Joe movie, The Rise of Cobra as well. There's quite a few sort of throwaway lines that kind of poke fun with I think they've got kung fu grip and realistic hair kind of references, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think you need to own up to and accept what you are. And if you don't want to use an element, don't use it. But don't make fun of it because like, yes, is a person wearing yellow spandex silly in real life? Yes, but like for 50 years, that's what Wolverine has been in the comics, and like don't like that's my jam. Like don't make fun.
All right, Tim, you just squashed my favorite line of dialogue.
Yeah, that was going to be my favorite line of dialogue too.
Really?
Now we're just going to draw a big line through that whole segment.
You guys like this scene?
I don't know if I like the scene, but I thought that was funny.
I thought it was a cute line. How'd the Green Power Ranger get in here?
Okay, how about this? I think Green Power Ranger, I think that's fine. But then the next line is where it goes too far for me. And
the
it's
Ninja
not,
Force line.
It's not cruel and it's not mean-spirited, but it crosses a line for me. It's like, no, this is like G.I. Joe is inherently silly. Batman is inherently silly. And you can have a grounded movie like Batman Begins. You can have a fantastical movie like Batman. You can have a bonkers movie like Batman Forever. But like, he's a guy who dresses up like a bat and jumps from rooftop to rooftop. And that's crazy and not realistic. So if we accept one thing, we have to accept the other. It's like, no, there are ninjas in G.I. Joe. And, it's like in Retaliation, I wish the second live action movie, I wish there had been one more line of dialogue where someone just explains
From
how
Snake
and
Eyes.
why. Just how and why anyone, it's like, no, we actually know these ninjas and we team up with them sometimes. Like, I like how that movie embraced that. It's like, no, this movie is going to be a lot of ninja stuff, and I wanted a little bit more of the connective tissue. All right, sorry, back to the Devil's Due comic.
Let's move on to some G.I. Joe fashion.
Armani, Prada, Versace too. Joe's changed their outfits from black to blue. Duke and Hawk, look but don't gawk. Changing their kit, whoa, is that legit? Swapping camo jackets, headgear and boots. It's now neon colours and funky spacesuits. Sci-fi stalker and even Roadblock. While Bill, Flint and Mutt gave me a shock. So go take a walk if clothes aren't your passion. Cause it's comic book talk and lovely G.I. Joe fashion.
So there was quite a lot of redesigns here, and a lot of these were coming from actually Josh Blaylock, who was doing a lot of the some of the redesign work, what the characters would look like, and then passing that on to the artists like J. Scott Campbell for the covers and Steve Kurth for the interiors. So we've got some interesting new looks for the people. So maybe we'll sort of hone in on a couple of these. The big one, I think, is Shipwreck, who we first saw on the cover. So he's ditched his village people in the Navy look and is now there in his sort of how would you call that? A sort of a turtleneck kind of roll neck jumper with the hat. Looking, still looking very nautical. Every bit the seafaring badass, but this time actually, with much less room to poke fun at him.
Yeah, Shipwreck, I liked that with the sweater. Like you said, it is still kind of, he looks like a sailor, but he doesn't look like Donald Duck. The ones that I didn't like were a lot of the redesigns were just bland. Like there was a shot, maybe in a later episode or in a later issue, of Flint, and he's standing there and he's just got like, a black shirt and maybe some things on his wrist. And it's, like Tim said in the last podcast you guys did about their iconic looks, I don't mind changes or tweaks, but if you're going to change it, don't just make it something bland and that doesn't have a lot of style or flair to it.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the snake, the shipwreck look clearly works. Was instantly very popular and was very quickly actually incorporated in the toys. That this design was used as the basis of a number of toys. Flint's redesign was basically let's take Flint and stick him in a black t-shirt instead, which seems fairly pointless just given how bland it is.
Yeah, just boring.
My two thoughts here are something I like and something I don't. I agree with what you have both just said about Shipwreck. Importantly, there is blue, not on the cover so much, but in the interiors. The cue for Shipwreck, like what makes Shipwreck? He has a beard and a mustache, he has some kind of hat, and he's wearing blue. If you had to boil it down to the minimum, that's it. If you put him in like green fatigues, it's not Shipwreck. And so this costume here checks off those boxes. But importantly, Shipwreck's specialty changes, or his expertise changes. From 85, when his first figure was released, to 94, he becomes a SEAL, right? He's not just a sailor, he becomes a SEAL. And so his costume here, he becomes a Navy SEAL. And so his costume here feels like a nod to that. I'd like a little more gear, I'd like, I don't know, one more thing on his belt or one more strap on his pants, but it's great. Destro has a lot of less elegant and more like comic book villain stuff happening on his pants and his sort of top, right? Like he still has the cat. Okay, so it's iconically Destro, right? Metallic mask, black and red. I need to see the red gem around his neck, and I need to see something that refers to his cowl or his collar, right? And sort of everything else from then on, it's like gloves, no gloves, like fancy boots, not fancy boots. That can change. But what's happening here is there's a lot of like red ribbing and gray ribbing on his costume that is cool looking, but it doesn't mean anything. And he's got these giant stompy boots, which are referred to in the convention special, the comic book that Devil's Due published before issue 1 came out. And you can see 2 or 3 different artists taking a swipe at this new Destro. And what I think I see here, like Josh Blaylock was a like punk or goth kid in his fashion and in some of his sensibilities, like his hair, his clothes, his jewelry, like as a person at conventions, like that was part of his gestalt. And that also bore out in some of the characters that he wrote and drew in some of his comics that he did on his own through Devil's Due, not something like G.I. Joe where he's doing it with other people. And what I think I see here in these boots on Destro are like big, stompy, goth boots. And that's cool. I don't know if that's Destro.
Yeah, Destro I thought was way over designed when I first saw him, and I was like, what is going on with this character? Later, I think it does kind of get explained in a way in the story, so I didn't have as much a problem with it once I found out what's going on. But initially, yeah, I was like, what is this? It's the opposite you see with some of the Joes that are under-designed. And you look at that first splash page, or it's not a splash page, but it's a large image of Destro. And like you said, with all of the ribbing and the big stomping boots and stuff, and you're just like, what is going on here?
I agree with all of that. The other one that I saw, which I think I like, was sort of the take on Zartan. You know, he looks quite different to Zartan as we know, and I sort of thought him of as a Marlon Brando kind of Zartan, a lot sort of thicker set and sort of maybe like the idea of him being a big gangster boss and sort of gaining that power and sort of letting maybe having this illness which is making him less active, and just sort of luxuriating a little bit in this power and overindulgence of just thickening out, just in the way that a Jabba the Hutt might, or Bib Fortuna. So yeah, just as you saw Bib Fortuna kind of thicken out at the end of Mandalorian as well, once he'd gained some power as well.
That's interesting. I really hadn't picked up on that, but that's a good point.
Yeah, Zartan, he's, you think of the cover to issue 24 where he's balancing on the water moccasin, about to blast the dragonfly, and we don't know it yet, but like he's one of the ninjas, and he's powerful and muscular and in shape like all those guys. And Mark, you make a good point here that he's more like a crime boss now, and his head is drawn wider.
Yeah,
I appreciate it's okay. So all right, so what are the cues that make Zartan at a minimum? He needs some kind of like face makeup or tattoo or shadows on his face in those sort of diamond shapes. He needs something active on his head. I would prefer a hood, but I also think that second Zartan action figure where he's got an orange mohawk really makes a bold statement. And then something about his chest and his pants need to have a little bit of gear, right? Like his boots, or those pieces on the action figure that stuck onto his thighs, or the chest plate.
You're like armor.
Yeah, armor, but also because the actual action figure turned blue in sunlight, they specifically, Hasbro made this clear chest piece so that you can sort of have fun with, like, can I see the skin color through the clear plastic? Or can I block the sunlight? So part of his chest is blue and part of his chest is this Caucasian color. And since we don't really see Zartan here in the comic much from the neck down, we're missing an opportunity to use the one or two of those cues. He's just sort of wearing, like, I guess, a black long leather jacket, and he's got a black shirt, and I don't know about pants and boots. So this redesign is sort of 2/3 there for me.
Sure. Okay. So was there anything else that we wanted to talk about before we get into some of the little nuggets of detail in I Spy?
There's one little thing that I actually had written down under details, but it goes back to costuming again. There's a panel where it's on the page where Destro agrees to sit down and listen to Cobra Commander, and in the very last panel you see Dr. Mindbender sitting at the table with the Crimson Twins, and he's putting a fedora on, and I just think that the look of Mindbender with the suit and the vest and the glasses and the fedora is perfect. I was like, that is such a good look for that character.
Yeah, it sort of does seem to fit. It's very much a Joker kind of look in terms of the purple suit and the fedora, but yeah, it does seem to fit with the look of Mindbender. Cool. So let's go playing I Spy and see what little mini details, other mini details there are.
I spy with my little eye.
So I spied, and this wasn't tricky, but I spied Kamakura. So first page, and already out of the gate, Devil's Due is creating a brand new G.I. Joe character, and one that seemed to gain quite a lot of traction. So he does become quite an important character as it progresses, but also he was one that was subsequently made into a figure by Hasbro later on in 2003, I think it was. Any other? So that was real precise, looking at really in the details for something that probably you two guys missed. But was there any other little mini nuggets of detail that you spotted that you liked?
One thing that I liked when Duke calls the Joes back in, that he doesn't address them specifically or only by their code names. He calls Scarlet Shanna, he calls Roadblock Marvin, Shipwreck Hector, and I like that. I like that, the idea that they're not always going to address each other by their code names, because if you watch a TV show like The Unit, which is about, it's kind of Delta Force, but they don't call it Delta Force. They have code names. All the characters have code names, but you never hear them except for when they're out in the field and they might be calling each other on the radio. Any other time, they're just, Sergeant, whatever your name is. And I always kind of thought that that's how the code names should be used.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting observation, and I agree. And it's not something that Larry really did in his original run. It was, I think, very rare that you would see the actual,
Real names.
real name being used in the book. You might see it sort of occasionally for the likes of Hawk, but very rare occurrences, I would say. So to actually have them interacting and calling themselves by their real names, it's interesting and it's different, and it sort of, I guess, does make them more like people rather than just action figures out on their mission.
I spy an inconsistent use of the capital I letter form. Okay, so you all know what serifs are, right? If you draw the letter I, it's just an up and down line. But if it has a little crossbar on the top and bottom, those are called serifs. And if you type in Microsoft Word, you might know like what sans serif means, right? That's a font that doesn't have those little bits, like on the bottoms of T's and the tops of J's. So there's a rule in comics lettering, which is that, because comics lettering is traditionally all capital letters, so there's a rule that if the word I is used by itself, like I salute you, that gets serifs. And if the letter I is in a word, like is or inside, it does not get serifs because it's too crowded and it's distracting. And there are both kinds of I's in this lettering. And I need to spend a moment on this because I'm just going to jump to the end. I'm sorry, this lettering is not professional. If you want to get into lettering comic books and you have a hard time seeing like what makes good lettering and bad lettering, and I don't mean fonts and I don't mean sound effects, I mean spacing, kerning, word balloon shapes, and placement. This is a comic book to pick up to see lettering that is not ready for prime time. There are lots of word balloons where the sort of lines of dialogue in them aren't evenly stacked inside the actual ovals. Pages 6 and 7, all of a sudden the font gets compressed, but it's not because there's like too much dialogue in a tiny panel. Like the font, it doesn't get smaller, it just gets sort of left and right more squished together. And then when Cobra starts talking on the page after they're all sitting at the table together, there are all these word balloons that are squeezed into corners that are these sort of odd like squares with rounded corners. And like the page with the sound effect CLUD, C-L-U-D, where a soldier gets hit with the back of a gun. Like, I like that sound effect. It looks hand drawn. I like that. I'm sorry, the lettering in this comic is not good. And I want to point out there is no credited letterer.
Yeah, it just says visit blambot.com for free comic fonts, doesn't it?
So what that suggests to me is that, one, someone at Devil's Due, like a production artist or the editor, lettered it, or that more than one person lettered it. And like that's allowed. Like lettering can be, it's like color, right? You can have a studio do it. But even the first page, like the very first page, the second panel where everything's green because we're looking through binoculars and two dreadnoks are talking back and forth, right? The indication that it's two different people talking is that the colors of these boxes are different. But all the dialogue is too close to the top line, and there's the one that's all the way on the right side, there's too much space on the bottom of it. Sorry, Devil's Due. Try again.
That was one of the things that I was going to say was the lettering was very unprofessional looking. And to your point about the eyes, you can look at the page where the Cobras are talking, and the first panel has the Crimson Twins. The first word balloon, the eyes have the serifs, and then the second one, they're gone. And it's, like you said, it's within the sentence. It's in the middle of words, and it's just the square shapes and the rounded. It was another thing that kind of took me out of the book a little bit.
Now, for listeners who are saying, Tim, you're nitpicking too much.
Tim, you're nitpicking too much.
But my response is that lettering in comics is like editing in film, right? It's supposed to be invisible. right? Like there are, again, I'm not talking about like sound effects and fonts. And fonts add a lot to comics. There are fonts based on artists' handwriting. There are fonts that feel more like the 60s or the 90s. And there are treatments for word balloon. Like remember briefly, there was like a year at Marvel in, I don't know, 1997 or 8, where like every time the Human Torch talked, his word balloon was colored orange and his letters were white. Where like if Iceman spoke, his word balloon was blue and his letters were white. Like, cool, too much.
Well, even going back to the original Marvel run, didn't they do Road Pig with 2 different styles of lettering depending on which personality was talking?
They did, and they dropped it after a little bit of work, a bit of time. But yeah, for sure, there was originally the Road Pig and Donald personalities in different fonts. But yeah, it's I guess it's because, and I think it's a common mistake for indie publishing that people perceive the lettering as, an extra expense that maybe they can save because, it's just typing into a bubble and moving that around. Whereas it clearly is a very specific skill set. And if it's done badly, it stands out and it looks wrong. Whereas it
really stands out.
If it's done well, it's almost, as you say, invisible. Clearly, they've missed a trick here it's something that is worthy of, picking up. And I've seen it to the extent of picking up a cheaply done sort of an indie book done by one person. They've clearly saved a bit on the lettering by trying to do themselves, and I can't look past the bad lettering to any of the rest of it because it just sticks out so much that it's just a hurdle that doesn't get you the price of entry almost.
Yep.
My other I Spy is page 11, the scene where Scarlet and Snake Eyes have a tense moment and then she smacks him and walks away. I have 2 problems with this scene. One, I don't think Scarlet would smack Snake Eyes. This feels like something that would never happen in the Marvel run, and that she can be upset, she can not speak to him. This feels too much like a soap opera moment. But in terms of publishing, there are 5 repeated panels where they're just standing sort of looking at each other. So the first panel gets drawn and the second, third, fourth, fifth panel are copied and pasted. And this is something you can do in comics. And it doesn't work. And my analogy is if you're watching a movie and you have 2 characters standing and not moving, even if they're not blinking, and they're just looking at each other, they breathe and like air molecules pass in front of the camera, between the camera and the actors. And so the scene, even if there's no movement and it looks like it's frozen, it sort of, quote, breathes. But if you take a photo of that shot, or if you pause your DVD, then they're frozen. And I have students in my comics class who do this. They want to repeat a moment, and so they copy and paste a panel. And I say, no, it looks like you paused the DVD rather than you animated a hold, right? So sorry, this needs to be redrawn each time, even though that's a pain.
Yeah, and not only that, but 5 panels, it's an incredible waste of space, especially when you're thinking about the other pages that we were talking about where they've got 13 panels on one page. This is something that could have been done in 2 or 3 panels, and it's, like you said, it's just kind of out of character. It didn't work for me.
And it doesn't look particularly an effective place to slap Snake Eyes, to be fair. That visor looks sharp.
Yeah, she's going to hurt her hand more than Snake Eyes'
A punch to the gut, I think, would work.
I'm very interested in the story that they're not good for each other anymore, that she's angry, he's guilty. And I'd like to see that explored, and I'd like to see her express her anger. This isn't how I'd like to see it expressed.
Okie dokie. Let's move on to favourite line of dialogue.
Quote of the week, 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 quote of the week.
Was there any remaining favourite lines? Now,
Tim, this is on you.
Tim has spoiled our fun. Tim?
No.
Tim's like, I liked at the end where it said the end.
It said to be continued, to be fair. Okay,
No.
I'll go with a no. Let's not pick one arbitrarily, but I did notice that Destro called. So what did he say exactly? He said
Called him a buffoon.
he called him a buffoon. Yeah, he just says "you buffoon," and I think that was another part of calling back to the cartoon. That famous line of dialogue from the movie where Destro goes,
Militarily speaking, it is only fair to say that Cobra Commander is a world-class buffoon.
Well done, sir.
"Thank you." So I'll leave it at that. Was there any errors detected?
Error detected. Error detected. No prize incoming.
The only little minor error that I thought I noticed was possibly a colorist mistake. On the page where the Joes are all called Mainframe, the way he's colored, he almost looks like he's from Central America or Mexico or something, or possibly Native American. And I wouldn't have a problem with changing that, except later on in the series, he doesn't look like that.
I think the intention here is that he's inside and he's not near a light source. I think the intention here is that's like Caucasian in shadow rather than a different ethnicity.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm willing to give that one a pass. The couple that I picked up on were in that original scene with Duke gathering everyone together. They had a pile of photos of like intel of Cobra, and on that pile of photos, it included Serpentor, who died at the end of Civil War, and Cobra Commander in his battle armor, which you'd expect would be Fred Seven, who was chucked down the freighter and died then. So, what is the point of these reference photos here? Clearly, you've got a bunch of people who know them, but how on earth is it relevant to their new intel other than just going, oh, here's a bunch of Cobra faces?
That's Serpentor, baby. That's one of the greatest hits. You got to have that in there.
But how's it relevant to their latest intelligence gathering? It's not.
Yeah, he's not.
And so the other thing that I noticed, which is probably less of an error and more of an artistic license, is that Zaymot's scar appears to have moved. It was previously on his right cheek and is now under his left eye.
Yeah, I didn't pick up on that one. Good,
No, I didn't either.
Good job, sir.
Nice eye.
There we go.
Eagle-eyed as well as wolf-eared.
You know what? Sorry, I want to go back to I Spy. On the next page, three Joes walk past I don't know if it's a green shirt sort of specific to the Joe team or some military personnel who is sort of already in this base. But in the final two panels, this guy salutes as three Joes walk by, and he thinks in a thought balloon, wow, Joe's in the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might be the first time there's ever been a thought balloon in a G.I. Joe comic. And that could be interesting on its own, if it's correct. It's also an interesting sort of slight change in the rules for this comic book where, like in writing, you have third person omniscient voice where, the narrator writes like he, she, it does this, but you also know what everyone is thinking.
Yeah.
And, a lot of G.I. Joe a lot of stories, right, we're sort of more in the point of view of the good guys, or we start with the bad guys and then we go to the good guys and we mostly stay with the good guys. And this is an interesting, I think I like it. I think it works. This is an interesting bit where we have an internal monologue for a character, literally, because we can read their thoughts, as opposed to just letting the body language of the salute and the guy's surprise show it, or having some version of narration
and it's a bit like a comedy beat as well, isn't it?
Yes.
There was at least one other time when all the Cobras were at a like a dinner or something. Turned out later they were in the back of a truck, and they show every character in a little panel, and every one of them is thinking different about a different character. Like Cobra Commander, for example, might be thinking, is Destro going to betray me? Destro's thinking something. Scarface is thinking something. So we have seen word balloons in G.I. Joe comics before.
It's
not
just
very often.
very, very seldom. Yeah, I think
Okay.
there was definitely an example where Cobra Commander had a thought balloon very early on, probably somewhere in the 20s.
All right. Well, thank you. I stand corrected. This is the first time in a Devil's Due. This is the first time in a Devil's Due G.I. Joe comic that we've had Athopoulos.
Oh yeah, first time.
You're right. Yeah.
You can only get away with that once, Tim.
But again, that's also, if you look at that, it's one where they've copied the panel, just like on the Snake Eyes Scarlet page. And why is he still saluting?
Because he's nervous. I think you can get away with one copy and paste, but when it's
but
more
not
than
5.
That, when it's more than that, you have to redraw it.
Yeah, and then, a salute coming down can be delayed. That's allowed. I came up with an idea for a brand new feature, and it is called "You Are the Editor."
Talking Joe is editing. What changes will we think? Rearrange all sorts of things like covers. The script is in the air, correcting everywhere, wielding the red pen of change. Devil's Due, our moment to comment, make it right, where we can make the book our way. We're wielding change, we're editing.
Imagine the power. So the idea of this feature is that what small change could you conceivably make? So you've just got the script in, or maybe you've seen even the finished art, and you can't go making huge sweeping changes, but you could tweak something here, there. What small change would you make for this issue?
Well, I mean, we've all picked apart the art and costume design and stuff enough. Other than those kind of things, I really didn't have a lot of problem with the story itself. I enjoyed it probably more than I thought I did. The only thing that I would have changed or maybe improved on was I would have given a little more explanation of what happened with Cobra in the last 7 years. To prepare for this podcast, I went back and listened to Chief and Chris discussing the end of the Marvel series, starting with around 121, and they mentioned that the Cobras had almost completely pulled out of Cobra Island, and I didn't know why, and I was kind of looking for an answer for that, because the creation of Cobra Island was one of Cobra's biggest victories, in the entire series, and it was a major driver for the series, the story, for several years. So I don't know why they abandoned that. And I wondered if you guys had any idea about that.
I think they fill in some of the gaps a little bit in between, and the first arc of the Frontline series was created ostensibly to try and fill in the gap in between 155 and this issue 1. Okay. So we do find out a little bit. But the point about Cobra Island is an interesting one, because actually the last we saw of it in the Marvel comics, Cobra had already abandoned it to Firefly, I believe. So I don't know that they actually had gone back and properly reoccupied it in the Marvel run itself. Clearly in between the gaps, they've gone back and then they've subsequently reabandoned it again. It must have all sorts of abandonment issues for an island if they feel.
Yeah, you made me and then left me. But yeah, I think that's the only thing that I would have changed, other than the stuff that we've already talked about, character designs, lettering, different little technical things like that.
I think I probably would have gone along the route of can we just go a little bit easier on some of those cheekbones and chins, maybe just particularly around smoothing out the way that the Baroness looked, that kind of thing. Not on a whole scale real draw, but just trying to find maybe some of the worst examples of it and just kind of
ease up a little bit.
Ease up a bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Tim, letters aside.
No, it's letters. My small editing change would be I would remove 5 words from this comic book. But before I tell you which ones they are, a parallel. I can't wait. In the early 90s, all of the Image Comics creators, they'd left Marvel and they're selling like crazy and they had all this creative freedom. And all of them loved the work of Jack Kirby because they'd all been reading Marvel comics in the 60s and 70s and then worked on those characters or sort of their brethren. And those guys published a Jack Kirby comic, right? Phantom Force in, I think, 94. And that was Jack Kirby's biggest payday ever. His payment and royalties, or his royalties from Phantom Force #1, which he penciled and all the Image guys inked, right? Like Rob Liefeld inked some pages, Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, Eric Larson. It's not an amazing comic, but it's really interesting to see that artwork. And the series continued for a few more issues, and then I think with a different publisher. And like a lot of Jack Kirby stuff, after his prime in the 60s and 70s, it's not his prime work. But the Image guys didn't like dedicate all of their first issues of Spawn and Wildcats and Youngblood to Jack Kirby. I think McFarlane did dedicate an issue of Spawn to Jack Kirby, but they didn't only do that. They hired him, or they let him publish through them, and then they worked on it. And then in the back of that comic, they all wrote a couple paragraphs saying how much they loved his work and how much they were excited to work on this book. So the 5 words I would take out of this comic, Devil's Due G.I. Joe #1, are on the inside front cover, specially dedicated to Larry Hama. Hama was still alive. I mean, he's still alive right now, and he's still writing G.I. Joe right now. Hama was out there and available, and it is a bold decision to continue the Marvel continuity that was 99% written by that one person without using that one person on this new comic. And like, you can make that call. It's like, you know what? I'm going to write the continued G.I. Joe, not the guy who wrote G.I. Joe. And, there could be timing reasons, money reasons, personality reasons. Whatever the reason, I think dedicating it to him is tacky.
Interesting. Because I know that Josh Blaylock actually called Larry Hama ahead of issue 1 being published. And he said it was a very awkward call because, one, he's, saying, I'm, going to continue your version of G.I. Joe and not offer you a job. But two, it was also a cold call to Larry, and he's not necessarily the warmest, most chatty guy. If getting a cold call out of the blue, and I think there was a couple of considerations for Josh at the time. The first being that he'd have had to pay Larry, and he didn't necessarily have loads of cash flow. He was, I think, doing temp jobs in the run up to this coming out, and most of the creators were being paid on back end deals. And secondly, he said that this was his big shot. This was going to be he wanted it to be a really big book. He was quite an unknown indie creator, and simply put, he just wanted to get his name out there, and this was going to be his shot. And if he wasn't drawing it and if he wasn't writing it, it wouldn't make his name. So he did definitely want to work with Larry, and was able to eventually with the first arc of Frontline, which hopefully we'll get to at some point down the line. But yeah, could have been all very different. Had a different call being made, and offering Larry that gig.
I should say, had Hama written the Devil's Due comic, I can imagine 2 years in, him not writing it anymore and someone else writing it, or him writing it until the end, and then when it came time for IDW to start its G.I. Joe comics, maybe IDW would have said, Larry Hama's a little overexposed or too affiliated with G.I. Joe. And so I think by having this decidedly not Larry Hama version run for several years, you have a hunger amongst the fans and one or two really thoughtful editors at IDW. Oh, why don't we continue the Marvel story with the guy who wrote the Marvel story? So yeah. I think you wouldn't necessarily have the current G.I. Joe comic that Hama is writing, if not for him not writing the Devil's Due book.
Yep, good point.
You mentioned the bench press series that didn't happen, that was going to be written by Larry, and I wonder how similar that would have been to the RAH book that we got 15 years later.
Hama wrote a proposal and Ron Lim penciled 4 pages. So the idea was that it was going to be a very small team, like just 12 Joes, and then other characters would be brought in, sort of mission specific. And a couple years had passed since issue 155, and Bench Press had a notion to launch one G.I. Joe comic and then start a second one, because they knew that there were so many characters, and they wanted to hire other creatives to work on it. You can read, I mean, Larry's proposal is out there online. You can read it. I think it would have been, in the way that the current Larry Hama G.I. Joe comic is a little topical to sort of real world events, I think that comic would have been a little topical to real world events and yet still noticeably G.I. Joe. And not being familiar with the Devil's Due run past the first year, I think it was more sort of straight action and a little bit of sci-fi without sort of references to like real world politics or news.
Yeah, I think the short answer is very different.
So would it have been a continuation of the original book?
Yeah. So they, have a Google and search G.I. Joe Bench Press, and you'll see the proposal and the pages of art that were done. But yeah, it sort of picks up essentially with a small handful of Joes going to the mothballed pit.
Okay.
So yeah, I think it was intended to be very much a continuation.
So I have one sort of large overall comment on this first Devil's Due issue. Well, I think what I didn't have when I read this first issue in 2001 was a global sense of it as a comic book. I was too close to it, like being a G.I. Joe fan and loving the Marvel run, and the things that were different or that didn't work about this were jumping out at me. With hindsight, rereading the comic yesterday, I can actually talk about it as a comic book. And unfortunately, it's not a good first issue because it's 23 pages long and it's 23 pages of talking. Someone gets bonked on the head with the butt of a gun, of a rifle. Someone gets kicked in the face with a big stompy boot, but it's played sort of for laughs. It's not a big action beat. Otherwise, it's all talking.
Don't forget the alligator that gets stabbed.
Okay, sure. On page 2, an alligator gets stabbed.
I know exactly what you mean, though.
But again, that's not a big dramatic story beat. That's like this guy's a badass beat, and it's done sort of in an understated way. It's like, oh, he barely moves, and the alligator behind him is dead. And, like, what's the obvious comparison? Well, let's compare Devil's Due G.I. Joe #1 to Marvel G.I. Joe #1, right? There are lots of ways that it don't line up. They don't line up because the Marvel issue is double-sized. It's got 2 stories. It's starting from scratch, new characters and a new scenario, whereas this is established characters and it's continuing a story. But what did the Joes do in that first issue, right? A scientist is kidnapped. She's on a train. They rescue her. They go to the Cobra base. Right, Cobra Commander is frightening, but there is also a scene where all the Joes are gathered, and there's a scene where we get some exposition of how they work at their base. Right, what happens here? Kamakura hands something to Snake Eyes. Turn the page. Snake Eyes calls a Duke. Turn the page. Duke talks to some Joes. Next page. Duke standing in front of a screen. Next page. Joes sitting at a table. Next page. Right. It's like this over and over and over. And because I love the characters and I'm so hungry for the story to continue and I want to see what Blaylock's angle on it is, when I read this issue, I'm all in. Like, I'm going to buy issue 2, right? This isn't make or break. And in around 2001, this phenomenon in comics publishing started, which is writing for the trade paperback, writing for the eventual collection. It's like, oh, I've got a story. Well, you should stretch out that 1 or 2 issue story to 4 or 5 or 6 issues, because the real unit that we're worried about here is the $15 or $20 reprinting in paperback of this story arc. You don't have to worry if any one issue is particularly a satisfying story chunk. And the other way of looking at that, that's the pessimistic way of looking at it, padded. The optimistic way of looking at it is, no, I'm not writing a 20-page story and then a 20-page story. I'm writing a 150-page story, and you shouldn't judge the first 20 pages or the middle 20 pages. It'd be like watching the first 20 minutes of a movie, or any 20 minutes of a movie. You could argue that it's really fair to read the 4 issues of this arc and to judge it on its merits. But, like this comic sold, this was ICV2 for September 2001, puts this G.I. Joe #1 at the 13th highest selling comic of the month. And it's behind some X-Men books, 2 DC books, and a Spider-Man book. And its sales are 62,000, which is, for then, quite high. Compared to the Marvel run, not high. But this was the number 13 book. And because of the September 11th and, patriotism connection and the nostalgia boom of 2001, people were paying attention. And I don't know that this first issue does enough exciting stuff, like an action scene, or like rescue, or like repelling a wall. Like, what if this had started in media res and we're cutting back and forth between Duke bringing the team back together and also the team that he's now put back together, like invading the Dreadnought compound. I need more action. It's an action comic.
Yeah, well, like you said, that was a trend that was going on. And if you look at the first 6 issues of Ultimate Spider-Man by Bendis and Bagley, they take 6 issues to do what Marvel did in 1 issue and was Amazing Spider-Man or Amazing Fantasy 15. G.I. Joe #1 from 1982 was a self-contained story. You beginning, middle, and end. Every page had some kind of action on it. It seemed, and like you said, there's 2 or 3 bits of action in this whole book.
Very good. Have you got that? Have you got the listing of the month that this came out in front of you, Tim?
I do.
That top was #1. Was that Wolverine Origin, or was that the following month?
It must be the following month, because
Okay.
the top 4 comics are all X-Men comics, but not Wolverine.
Maybe it was issue #2, because I know that Josh Blaylock said that he missed out from the #1 spot for the biggest selling comic. Maybe this was G.I. Joe #2, because it was edged out by the Wolverine Origin story by Jenkins and Quezada. The book had pre-orders of 69,000 apparently, and Josh went and printed 100,000, given his confidence in the book, which all eventually sold out as well. And it went on to have 3 printings plus an additional printing, which was issue 1 and 2 reprinted together. So it was, for a G.I. Joe book, it was astoundingly popular. And I think you correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, but the current IDW Larry Hama book is closer to like 6,000 or something. It's miles apart.
Yeah, but the market's completely different, and it's
Sure.
The Devil's Due comic was $2.95. The IDW comic is $3.99. There weren't digital sales then. There are now, although they're not a big percentage at all. And IDW is a freestanding publisher, whereas Devil's Due was a studio, a small company publishing through Image. So, we don't know how much Blaylock paid Hasbro for the license. We don't know how much IDW pays Hasbro for the license. We do know that Marvel paid Hasbro in '81 very, very little for the license. That comic was seen as advertising and a way to tell the story, not necessarily for Hasbro another way to make money on G.I. Joe directly, but indirectly.
Good point. This sounds like a good segue into some true or false exploration of the circumstances around the Devil's Due book in a sequence I like to call Devil's True or Devil's Poo. Devil's true, or poo, poo, poo is all I want to know right now. True, or poo, poo, poo. Let's find out the answers right now. So, true or false, true or poo. We'll alternate maybe Jay and Tim. So, Jay, For you, as a young child, Josh Blaylock initially loved Transformers and didn't care so much for Joe.
True.
It is true. Ding ding. But that changed, and he did become very much a G.I. Joe fan and sort of less so on the Transformers. He described himself as having a Rain Man-like knowledge of G.I. Joe as a child. Tim, for you, Blaylock had an in at Hasbro because his uncle worked there.
I'm going to say false.
False, correct. His in was his experience to working in licensing from a t-shirt company and having a familiarity of the ins and outs of licensing. Jay, the team at Image was a big help to the Devil's Due team in getting the license from Hasbro.
Based on what we've said earlier, I kind of don't think so. I could be wrong.
Ding, yeah, false. As we
right.
say, he got the experience in his licensing for the t-shirt company, and he was self-published from 1996, so he had good knowledge of a lot of the way that the industry works. So he decided to go for it alone with a lot of youthful gumption. He was only about 22 when he secured the G.I. Joe license. So yeah, a very young guy with obviously a lot of confidence. He went out to Hasbro, was somehow able to agree the license at, in inverted commas, a ridiculous royalty rate, but had enough self-belief that he thought if he got the license, he would find a way. Build it.
That's really impressive.
And he wanted to get that license down first before then shopping the idea around to any of the companies like Image, because he feared that other people get the same idea, might be able to have a little bit more gravitas behind them as, older people or having a larger company behind them, and would effectively get gazumped and would get edged out of it entirely. Okay, I think we're back to Tim again. Several companies really wanted to run the G.I. Joe book once Josh had secured the license and was shopping it around, and there was a bidding war, which meant that Blaylock got a great deal at Image.
Geez, I wish I knew, but that sounds true.
False.
Aw, I'm so disappointed in myself.
So he shopped it to Top Cow first, and they said no. Then he went to Image Central, and publisher Jim Valentino didn't like it at all, but was talked around it by some of the people around him, and they eventually said yes. The basic Image deal at the time was $2,500 fee per book, plus the cost of printing, but they charged him $3,000 because they really weren't keen, so they bumped up the rate.
Yeah, it's not really an Image book. Never, I was kind of surprised when I saw it come out from Image. I'm like, Image has the G.I. Joe license now? It just never seemed like a fit.
Even if they change the logo green, surely that's enough, man. Okay,
put them all in armor with big shoulder pads.
Right, I'll save up some more facts for True or Poo next week.
Perfect.
And I think we are running long, so I
Super
think
long.
we will have to save up all of the other other things that we would like to otherwise talk about: Toy Talk, G.I. Joe merchandise, listener questions, innuendo, of course, as well. We'll have to save that up for next time. I'm afraid. Sorry, guys. I think
That's okay.
I think if we were releasing a 3-hour podcast, the people might start either complaining, which would be bad, or wanting a 3-hour podcast every time, which would be worse.
Joe Rogan does it somehow.
I have to edit this thing, man. Oh, dear. So I think let's wrap it up there. And next time on Talking Joe, we will be back on ARAH, me and Tim, covering issue 277, which is the Law and Order issue of Untold Tales arc. And then we'll be back here again for part 2 of Disavowed, where we will be covering the rest of the arc. So issues 2 to 4 of this first arc. So look forward to joining you all then. Thanks to Tim for your second round out on the show. Thanks for joining us, Jay, and look forward to having you back to talk all things Disavowed next time.
Yep, it's been fun.
Yes, let's talk comics.
And you can find us in all of the usual places. Talking Joe, a G.I. Joe podcast on Facebook, Talking_Joe on Twitter, Talking Joe Comics, all one word on Instagram, or Talking Joe Comics @gmail on the email. And of course, you can also now find us at talkingjoe.co.uk, our new website. Wow.
Nice.
Look forward to seeing you there. Where can people find you, Tim?
Find me at arealamericanbook.com, facebook.com/arealamericanbook, and Instagram @arealamericanbook.
What about you, Jay? Where can the good people find you?
I'm on Facebook. I do a lot of G.I. Joe sketches that I post up there a couple times a week usually. So if anybody wants to take a look at those, just look for me on Facebook.
Cool stuff. We'll have to now that you're officially part of the Talking Joe family. We'll have to see a dedicated thread to your sketches, I think, because I know that you started sharing a few of those a couple of months ago. But let's see how you're progressing for the rest of the guys.
All right, we'll do.
Yeah. When all's said and done, you can catch us down the road
because we've been talking Joe.
And we're all out of Joes.
Yeah, that's right, boy. Oh, dear. Laters.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.